Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. When a prominent figure collapses during a refined luncheon, suspicion rises with the steam of untouched tea. A misplaced seating card, a hurried whisper, and a well-timed interruption hint at a deeper game playing out beneath the surface. But who stands to gain, and what was meant to stay hidden behind polite conversation? If you've ever watched a case unfold and thought, "I saw that coming," this one might just surprise you. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if this mystery stirs your curiosity, subscribe and join us again for the next unraveling. Now pour something warm, draw the curtains close, and let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. The Interrupted Lunch. Archie Goodwin here, and let me tell you, I'd been looking forward to a quiet afternoon. Wolfe had finished browbeating Fritz into preparing a veal ragout with mushrooms so delicate I thought they'd faint if you looked at them too hard. I had a stack of paperwork that I had no intention of finishing, and Wolfe had a stack of orchids that he very much intended to finish. That was the natural order of things in our brownstone. Fritz in the kitchen, me trying not to be useful, and Wolfe pretending the outside world didn't exist. Which is precisely why the doorbell rang at 2 o'clock. Now, when you live in a house with a man who treats visitors like they carry the plague, you develop a reflex. You hesitate at the bell. You listen for the second ring. You hope it's a delivery boy, and you curse silently when it isn't. This time, the bell was followed by a knock, which meant persistence. The kind of persistence that usually comes wrapped in trouble. I opened the door and got my first dose of it. The man was tall, sandy-haired, and dressed in a suit that tried too hard. He had the look of someone who could recite talking points in his sleep and probably did. He introduced himself as Walter Kimbrough, aide to Senator Stephen Forbes. The senator, he explained, had a matter of urgent delicacy that required Mr. Wolfe's attention. I told him Mr. Wolfe didn't accept clients without an appointment. He told me the senator didn't accept being refused. We stood there a full 30 seconds, sizing each other up like two cats on a fence, before I let him in. Wolfe was in his chair when we entered, looking like a mountain that had no plans to move. Kimbrough started his pitch. Something about a luncheon at the Astoria, dignitaries, political donors, and a sudden disappearance of a crucial folder. Wolfe closed his eyes halfway through, which is his version of a yawn. "I must inform you, sir," Wolfe said finally, "that my distaste for politics rivals my distaste for exercise. Both are avoidable if one has sense." Kimbrough insisted that without Wolfe's discretion, a scandal could break before evening. Archie Goodwin, yours truly, could see sweat forming along his collar, and not because Fritz keeps the thermostat low. "You expect me to leave my home," Wolfe murmured, his voice like honey over gravel, "to attend a political luncheon?" "No," Kimbrough stammered. "We only ask that you advise, quietly. From here, if you prefer." That word, quietly, caught Wolfe's attention the way a cork popping catches a drinker's. He studied Kimbrough as if the man were a new breed of orchid, ugly but rare. "Archie," Wolfe said at last, "obliged Mr. Kimbrough with beer. He has prepared himself. I would not deny him the courtesy of refreshment." That's how I knew we weren't out. When Wolfe offers beer to a stranger, it means the hook is in, whether he admits it or not. And just when I thought the afternoon couldn't get any more interesting, Kimbrough leaned forward and dropped the bait. "The folder that vanished," he said, his voice low. "It contains names of those who funded the senator's last campaign. If it falls into the wrong hands—" Wolfe's eyes opened fully. "Archie," he said, "it appears lunch will be delayed." Which was fine with me, because I had a feeling we were about to bite off more than even Fritz's ragout could chew. Chapter 2. The Brownstone Disturbed. If there's a sound I dislike more than a doorbell at 2, it's the telephone at 2:05. It means the doorbell worked. Kimbrough perched on the edge of the red leather chair like it might invoice him by the minute. Wolfe had swiveled 3 degrees toward him, which for Wolfe is the equivalent of a bear standing up. I parked myself on the corner of my desk, where the phone could bite me first. "Archie," Wolfe said, "notified Fritz that luncheon is deferred. Also, tell him I regret it." "That'll send him weeping into the bechamel," I said, and rang the kitchen. Fritz's reply was in 3 languages, and all of them polite, which is how you cuss when you're Swiss and employed by a tyrant who tips in orchids. Kimbrough cleared his throat. "Senator Forbes is on his way," he insisted. "Insistence," Wolfe murmured, "is a currency that buys little here." "Why, Mr. Goodwin, are we infested with politics?" "Because it paid admission," I said. "Do we sell them the deluxe tour?" Wolfe shut his eyes. "We will hear the senator. Hearing cost nothing." It cost us 15 minutes of my life and a nudge to our thermostat, because Fritz likes the kitchen tropical and the front room civilized. At 2:20, the doorbell did an encore. Senator Stephen Forbes came with it, compact and barbered, the kind of man who smiled with his mouth and kept his eyes for inventory. He was followed by a woman with calculation in her heels and a folder clutched like it held her last breath. "Mr. Wolfe," the senator said, extending a hand. Wolfe didn't take it. "You don't shake hands with a mountain." "I'm sitting," Wolfe said. "You will forgive the economy. I conserve motion, and you conserve candor. Mr. Goodwin will manage your coats if you intend to stay long enough to discompose me." The woman handled her own coat. "Vivian Loring," she said, "campaign director." Kimbrough did the introductions again, as if names improved with rubbing. I put them in chairs and took the one that keeps my back to the wall and my patience in easy reach. Forbes began like all men who want something they can't buy outright. We had lunch today in Astoria. Private salon, 40 donors, 2 journalists, and a number of people who never eat bread but reach for it when you announce a policy. A leather folder that should have been in my briefcase was set on the credenza during the toasts. When we went to collect it, it was gone. "Describe the folder," Wolfe said, yawning with his eyelids. "Not the contents." "Black leather, my initials, a small brass snap. It contains—" "Contains?" Wolfe lifted a finger. "You heard me." Forbes recalibrated. "It contains schedules and commitments." Vivian Loring's mouth tightened like she'd bitten the wrong olive. "It contained donor information, names, amounts, contact notes. If that list leaks, people will see patterns where there are none. People, as I said, are very talented." "For God's sake," Kimbrough blurted, "we need discretion." "You need accuracy," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin, details." I took the seat like a waiter with a memory habit. Loring supplied the table map. Senator at center, donors radiating like petals, staff at the periphery, a credenza behind the senator where the black leather folder took a brief vacation before vanishing. A waiter brought champagne, a photographer took a flash that spooked a donor, someone made a joke about cholesterol, and somewhere in there the folder developed legs. "Who stood within reach of the credenza?" I asked. "Half the room at some point," Loring said, but immediately after the toast, Eleanor Voss, chair of the Finance Committee, was nearest. Graham Lyle, industry liaison, walked behind it to avoid a chair. June Armitage, from the Tribune, hovered for a quote. And Calvin Reed, our digital vendor, came in to fix the projector. Names go down easy. Pedigrees take chewing. I asked for chewing. Loring gave me a gristle with flavor. Voss. Decisive, expensive, loyal when it's efficient. Lyle. Smiles like a receipt. Armitage. Embargoed, but embargoes are promises you make to lunch. Reed. Eyes on screens, a contract for renewal. Wolfe said nothing. That is not the same as thinking nothing. He studied Loring's death grip on the substitute folder she'd brought, The senator's habit of glancing at the clock, the way Kimbrough's right shoe nudged the chair leg as if he were keeping a beat only he could hear. "You engaged us," Wolfe said finally, "to restore your equilibrium, not your folder. The former is more tractable. The terms are 10,000 retainer, cash. Mr. Goodwin will bill expenses. I will not leave this house. If I must, I shall resign the matter immediately, and you may return to your lunches." Forbes didn't flinch. Men who run for office learn early not to twitch. "You will have it," he said. "What do you require first?" "Truth," Wolfe said. "Failing that, coffee." "Archie." The bell rang again. I swiveled off the desk before Wolfe could add a second course of sarcasm. The visitor was slender, late 20s, raincoat damp, attitude dry. She flashed a press badge like a magician and said, "June Armitage, if the senator is here, my editor would love to know why." I gave her my best concierge smile. "If I tell you, my employer would love to know why I'm unemployed." "Good day." She didn't budge. I was at the luncheon. I saw the folder before it disappeared. "Congratulations," I said. "Very few people see things before they disappear. Try again when you've rehearsed an opening that ends with a subpoena." She slid a card into my palm without touching my skin. "You work for a man who loves precision. Tell him the snap on that folder was dented at the edge. Left side. I noticed because my own wallet has the same hardware. If he asks himself why a new folder would dent there, he'll call me." She pivoted. I admire a woman who leaves a scene on her line. I closed the door and brought her contribution back to the circus. "A reporter," I summarized, "with better manners than most donors and an eye for metal fatigue. Claims the snap was dented on the left." Wolfe's gaze flicked to Loring. Her cheeks gave a tremor that didn't register with the senator. "It wasn't new," she said. "He's had it for 2 years." "Ah," Wolfe said, "so we need not suspect the manufacturer." Kimbrough shifted, then stood. "If the press is circulating, sit," Wolfe told him, not loud, but permanent. "Mr. Goodwin." "What, boss?" "Your pocket notebook. Note that Miss Armitage observed a dent on the left side of the snap." "Noted. And note," he continued, "that Miss Loring is wearing a perfume that binds to wool more eagerly than to silk. She's on her 3rd coffee. She has not once set the folder in her lap. One guards what one fears to drop." Loring stared at him like he'd recited her dental records. "Are you accusing me of—" "I accuse no one," Wolfe said. "I collect stupid facts. They embarrass their owners at the most convenient time." We were getting along so well that I almost missed Kimbrough's hand when it strayed toward the far end of my desk, where nothing useful lives except a brass paperweight and a habit of curiosity. He wasn't after the paperweight. He was fishing along the underside with the careful sweep of a man who knows what his fingers want to find. I moved faster than his conscience. "Lose something?" he jerked, his hand back like the desk had bitten him. Sweat reappeared at his collar. "Number I. Sorry. Nervous." "Of course," I said, and slid my palm where he had been. I felt nothing but smooth wood and the faint adhesive of dust that knows it will never be disturbed by my boss. Then I felt something that doesn't occur naturally in furniture. The crisp edge of plastic. I pinched and pulled. A black dot no larger than a shirt button came away on my fingertips with a whisper of tape letting go. It wore a pinhole like a dimple. Loring stood so fast her chair barked. Forbes didn't move. His eyes did. Kimbrough became pale enough to qualify for winter. "Mr. Kimbrough," Wolfe said very softly, "pray tell me why my office has been equipped with a listener." Kimbrough swallowed. "That isn't ours." "Whose is it then?" I asked. He stared at the thing like it might answer. Then the phone rang, and the room went tight. I picked it up. A man's voice, low and quick. "Tell Wolfe the list is already copied. And tell him he's late." "Late for what?" I said. For the second theft, the voice said, and hung up. Chapter 3. Circles of Suspicion. You don't have to be a genius to know when a room is choking. The second I hung up the phone, the air inside Wolfe's office turned into something you could chew. I was holding the bug. Wolfe was glaring at Kimbrough. The senator was trying to keep his jaw from locking, and Vivian Loring looked like she'd bite through a steel cable if it would save her campaign. The second theft? I said, tossing the phone back into its cradle. That's a hell of a headline. No headlines, Loring snapped. Do you understand? If one whisper of this reaches— Silence, madam, Wolfe said, low and flat. The problem is not what reaches the newspapers. It is what has already reached the thief. Senator Forbes leaned forward. We don't have the luxury of riddles. You've got our retainer. Tell us what this means. It means, Wolfe said, that whoever lifted your folder has already made a copy. And if there is to be a second theft, then the first was merely a rehearsal. That was enough to make Kimbrough wilt like spinach in a hot pan. He wiped his forehead and muttered something about sabotage. Loring shot him a look sharp enough to cut fabric. Archie, Wolfe said, list the individuals identified as proximate to the folder. I flipped open my notebook. Eleanor Voss, Graham Lyle, June Armitage, Calvin Reed. 4 with elbows near the credenza. And who among them, Wolfe asked, would most benefit from duplication? The reporter, I said, but she brought me a clue instead of a headline, which is more than I can say for the campaign team. That earned me a glare from Loring. Wolfe ignored it. Miss Armitage's impulse is to preserve her source. A journalist hoards information until release is most profitable. Her note to us, if genuine, suggests she fears her scoop is imperiled by interference. Mr. Lyle, the liaison, thrives on leverage. Mrs. Voss thrives on money. Mr. Reed thrives on contracts. All would have a cause. Forbes slammed a palm on the arm of his chair. We don't have time for parlor games. If a second theft is coming, then you must tell me, Wolfe interrupted, what remains to be stolen. Silence. It stretched long enough for the rain against the windows to get a solo. Finally, Loring spoke. The senator's next luncheon. 2 days from now, same venue, same donors, another folder. This one contains strategy memos, proposed legislation, private polling, long-term promises. She inhaled sharply. If that leaks, careers burn. Ah, Wolfe said, eyes closing in satisfaction. So there is bait, yet unbitten. Kimbrough's voice cracked. Are you suggesting we let it happen? I am suggesting, Wolfe said, that we control where it happens, how it happens, and who thinks themselves clever in the attempt. He opened his eyes. Mr. Goodwin, present. You will visit these suspects. Conduct your usual probing. Mr. Lyle first, Mr. Reed second. If either balks, Saul Panzer will assist. I will require thorough impressions before dinner. Forbes rose, bristling. You expect us to sit idle while you— I expect you, Wolfe said, to do precisely nothing. Every gesture you make will alert the thief that you are aware. You will proceed with your luncheons, your smiles, your insipid speeches. Let them think you are blind. Forbes stared at him like a man trying to stare down granite. Then he exhaled and nodded, once. Very well. But if this backfires, do not threaten me, Wolfe said, and his voice could have curdled cream. Threats are the refuge of men who have lost initiative. You have retained me. You will endure me. They left soon after. Forbes stiff, Loring bristling, Kimbrough wilted like laundry in a storm. When the door closed, Wolfe shifted in his chair just enough to reach for a beer. He twisted the cap with the disdain of a man handling a cheap puzzle. Well, boss, I said, you've just volunteered me for a lap around the political circus. You sure you don't want to join me? I hear campaign donors love orchids. He grunted, which meant no, which also meant I'd be the one pounding sidewalks while he soaked in logic, as usual. I pocketed the bug, slid on my hat, and grabbed my coat. The city outside was wet, restless, and humming with ambition. 4 suspects, 1 dented snap, and a phone call promising a theft we hadn't even seen yet. I had names to chase, and a hunch that by sundown, one of them would start running first. Chapter 4. Archie's legwork. The thing about chasing suspects in New York is that it never feels like chasing. It feels like walking into a $100 lunch you're not paying for and finding the seats already warm. People don't run from you. They look through you, over you, and around you, and they hope you'll get bored before they do. My first stop was Graham Lyle's office, uptown. Industry liaison, which is a polite way of saying he took money from one crowd to whisper sweet nothings into the ear of another. The receptionist gave me the smile of someone who knows she's underpaid for keeping secrets, and 5 minutes later, I was parked opposite Lyle himself. He was polished to a mirror. Navy suit, cufflinks that could double as investment advice, and a tan that had no business in a rainy city. He offered me a drink like I was a senator. I declined because I wanted him thirsty, not me. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I've heard of you. You work for the great Nero Wolfe." "That's right. He sits, I walk, he thinks, I talk. That's how it works." He smiled like a man trying to sell me my shoes. "And you've come to ask about a folder." "Look at that," I said. "Words get around faster than cabs in a downpour." "I didn't say folder. You did." The smile twitched but held. Everyone at that luncheon saw it. Everyone also saw it was gone. But let me assure you, I did not need its contents. Assurances are wonderful. I collect them. The problem is, they don't hold up in court. Tell me this instead. When you passed behind the credenza, what did you see? His fingers tapped the desk, slow and measured. I saw a glass of water sweating onto polished wood. I saw Eleanor Voss adjusting her shawl. I saw Calvin Reed fumbling with cables, and I saw Senator Forbes lift a toast. And the folder. His eyes flickered just once. Still there. When I looked again, it wasn't. Simple as that. I leaned back. Funny. That's the same answer I got from a magician once. Something's there, then it isn't. The trick's never in what the audience sees. It's in what they don't. His jaw tightened. Are you accusing me? Number, I'm congratulating you. You've just joined a very select club. People I don't trust. That earned me silence thick enough to skate on. I left before it cracked. Next stop, Calvin Reed. His office was smaller, cheaper, and full of screens. The kind of place where a spilled soda could cause a national outage. He was thin, jumpy, with headphones around his neck and a mug that said, "Code, coffee." He barely looked up. "You're not a client. Who are you?" "Archie Goodwin, Wolfe's legman." That got me a frown. "The detective guy." "I didn't hire you." "No, but someone who pays you did. You were at the luncheon. You touched the projector." "Did you touch anything else?" He snorted. "Do I look like a folder thief? I don't even touch paper if I can help it." "Then why did you walk behind the credenza?" "Because the signal was dropping. Bad router placement. I moved the cables. Ask anyone." "I'm asking you." He leaned forward. "Look, I was in that room for 10 minutes. If someone grabbed the folder, it wasn't me. I don't need donor lists. I need contracts. The senator pays me for tech, not politics." "Then you won't mind if I check your equipment." That rattled him. His eyes darted to one screen, then another. "What for?" "Because," I said, "the man who called us knew about a second theft. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people who live with wires know how to tap them." He swallowed. His fingers twitched near the keyboard. "I didn't bug the senator." "I didn't say you did. But you knew somebody did, didn't you?" The silence told me more than words could. When a man with 20 screens suddenly has nothing to show you, you know he's hiding the one screen that matters. By the time I left Reed's office, The rain had given up, pretending it was weather, and started auditioning as punishment. I pulled up my collar, flagged a cab, and leaned back against cracked vinyl with my notes. 2 suspects down. Both slick, both are nervous in their ways, and both were too eager to play innocent before I'd called them guilty. I had Eleanor Voss and June Armitage, but my gut told me I'd stirred the pot enough for one day. When you stir too fast, you don't get soup, you get a mess. I was headed back to the brownstone when my phone buzzed. A text, unsigned. Stop digging, Goodwin, or the next folder won't be the only thing that disappears. Nice. Nothing warms the heart like a threat on a rainy night. Chapter 5. The Curious Clue. By the time I got back to the brownstone, my shoes were 2 blocks past soggy, and my patience was in the laundry. Fritz gave me a look that said I was dripping on his clean floor. I gave him a look back that said the city had started it. We were even. Wolfe was in his chair, of course, a mountain surveying its foothills. The desk bore the remains of a bottle of beer and the crumbs of something Fritz had dared to serve him cold. I handed Wolfe my notebook and shook the rain out of my hat. "Report," he said. I did my rounds. Lyle smiled too much. Reed twitched too much. They both insisted they saw the folder before it vanished, and neither of them thinks they need it, which is why I don't believe either of them. Also, Reed looked like he'd swallowed a socket wrench when I mentioned wiretaps. Wolfe scanned the notes, lips pursed. And Miss Voss? Didn't get there yet. I was saving her for dessert. Armitage, too. You are indolent, he said, but his tone lacked teeth. Sit. Summarize. I did. Lyle's smile. Reed's jitter, the way Reed's fingers twitched when I pushed. Wolfe closed his eyes and let me talk, which is his version of scribbling. When I finished, he opened them just enough to pin me with a look that meant a detail had slithered out of my story, without my permission. You said, Wolfe murmured, that Mr. Reed twitched when you spoke of taps. That's right. And yet he denied planting them. He denied bugging the senator. I corrected it. He didn't deny bugging someone else. Wolfe's lids lifted another fraction. Precisely. I leaned back. So you think he's the one who wired your desk? No, Wolfe said. If he were, he would have prepared an alibi. His reaction was too raw. He knew of it, yes. He did not place it. So who did? He closed his eyes again. That is not yet the question. The question is, who wishes us to know it was there? I mulled that over. Whoever left that bug under my desk hadn't been trying hard to hide it. It was taped loose enough for my fingers to find without looking, which meant they wanted me to find it. I was about to say so when Wolfe raised a hand. Do not babble. Consider instead the dent. I frowned. The snap? Yes. Miss Armitage observed a dent in the clasp. That was not idle. She sought to give us a distinction. If the folder was copied, then we must establish which folder is genuine, which copy is spurious. A dent, my dear Archie, is a curious clue. Small, so overlooked, but stubborn. I'll admit it. The fat man had me there. I'd been chasing suspects and ignoring the brass snap like it was a parking ticket. Wolfe, as usual, found a way to make a parking ticket the hinge of a case. So you think, I said slowly, that someone swapped the folder, left a copy behind. Maybe one without a dent. Pfui, Wolfe snorted. You think like a thief, not a detective. But in this case, the thief thought like you. That is why he or she erred. The phone rang before I could reply. I picked it up. The voice was female, quick and controlled. Goodwin? This is Eleanor Voss. I sat up straighter. Mrs. Voss, I was just planning to... Don't come to me. Meet me instead. 10 o'clock. Bar Adria. Side entrance. I'll explain everything, but for God's sake, come alone. Click. I turned back to Wolfe. Well, that saves me a trip. He grunted. Number it is bait. Mrs. Voss wishes to confide in you privately. She's either very reckless or very sure you will not leave alive." That was encouraging. Nothing like being told your evening plans included murder. "Do I go?" I asked. "Yes," Wolfe said, "but you will not be alone. Saul will be near enough to intervene, far enough not to frighten her. And you will remember, Archie, that when a woman of Mrs. Voss's wealth whispers in the shadows, she does not do so for your charm." I slipped the notebook into my pocket. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." "Confidence," Wolfe said, "is for politicians. I have facts. You will bring me more of them." And just like that, my quiet night off turned into a rendezvous with a society widow, a dented snap, and the possibility of getting shot before dessert. Chapter 6. Increased pressure. Bar Adria had the kind of lighting that made everyone look like they had something to hide, which I suppose was the point. It was tucked between a cigar shop and a tailor, and if you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't find it, which is why Eleanor Voss chose it. I arrived 5 minutes early, because when a society widow tells you 10 sharp, what she really means is she'll be 10 minutes late. Saul Panzer was in place already, across the street with a paper he wasn't reading. We had an arrangement. If I didn't walk out within 45 minutes, he'd walk in and make sure my insurance policy got renewed. Inside, the bar smelled of old gin and expensive fear. I took the side entrance as instructed, slid into a booth with a view of both doors, and ordered club soda. I didn't need a buzz. I needed a pulse. At 10:15, Eleanor Voss arrived. She wore black silk and pearls that probably had their own voting district. Her hair was lacquered into place, and her eyes scanned the room like she'd been practicing suspicion all her life. She spotted me, gave the faintest nod, and sat opposite without waiting for an invitation. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, her voice low. "Thank you for coming." "I'm flattered," I said. "Most people just threaten me when I poke my nose into their affairs." "You may still be threatened. But first, you should know why." That was an opening I could respect. I leaned back and let her talk. "The folder," she said, "was never meant to vanish. It was meant to be seen. The senator's enemies wanted whispers, not proof. But someone close, decided whispers weren't enough." I sipped the soda, watching her fingers worry about her pearls. "And by someone close, you mean?" "Not me," she snapped, a little too fast. "Not Graham Lyle either. He profits from appearances, not exposures. But Reed, that boy lives for leverage. And Vivian Loring, don't be fooled by her loyalty act. She would burn Forbes alive if it got her closer to power." She was unloading suspects like a blackjack dealer, and I wasn't sure if she was giving me the truth or a hand she'd stacked herself. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "You had all afternoon to chat with Wolfe." "Because Wolfe sits in judgment," she said, eyes narrowing. I think you still decide for yourself. Besides, Wolfe doesn't understand politics." I grinned. "Lady, Wolfe doesn't understand small talk, dinner parties, or paying cab fare, but he understands people. And people make politics." Her lips tightened. "Then understand this. If that second folder is taken, the scandal won't just ruin Forbes. It will drag half the finance committee into the gutter, including me." That put a little blood in the water. Fear makes even pearl clutchers honest. Or desperate. Before I could press, a shadow fell across the table. The waiter set down another glass of soda without asking. Only it wasn't club soda. It was amber, fizzing slow, with an ice cube that winked like it knew a secret. "I didn't order this," I said. "The gentleman at the bar sent it," the waiter replied. I turned. A man in a grey suit, face half lit by neon, raised his glass in a silent toast. Then he stood, dropped a bill on the counter, and walked out the front door. Eleanor Voss's hand trembled just enough to rattle her pearls. "He's been following me all day," she whispered. "I thought I'd lost him." Who is he? I don't know. Her eyes were wide. But he was at the luncheon, sitting 3 tables back. I thought he was a donor's guest. I motioned Saul in the street with a tilt of my glass. He got up, folded his paper, and slipped after grey suit like a shadow. Meanwhile, I leaned in. Mrs. Voss, you're going to tell me everything you remember about that man. Because if he just sent me a drink, he's either trying to warn me. I tapped the glass, watching the ice melt, or poison me. The tension cracked wide open when a crash echoed from outside. The sound of tires squealing, a shout, and then the unmistakable thud of something heavy meeting pavement. I bolted for the door, Eleanor clutching her pearls behind me. By the time I hit the street, Saul was crouched by a lamppost, looking grim. Grey suit was gone. What wasn't gone was the piece of paper fluttering against the curb, damp from rain. I picked it up, a torn corner of black leather with brass edging, the dented snap, torn clean off. Somebody had just left us a calling card. Chapter 7. Wolfe's strategic move. By the time I got back to the brownstone, my coat smelled like wet pavement and cheap whiskey I hadn't drunk. Saul had trailed Grey suit into the night, but the man evaporated like smoke. What we had instead was a brass snap torn from the folder and just enough questions to keep Wolfe awake past his bedtime, which meant my evening was about to get unpleasant. Wolfe was planted in his chair, mountain range intact, orchids somewhere above absorbing mist. I laid the fragment of leather and brass on his desk like it was crown jewels, then gave him the rundown. Bar Adria, Eleanor's whispered suspicions, Grey suit with the mystery cocktail, Saul's pursuit, and the finale with the torn snap. He didn't touch it. Wolfe never touches evidence if he can help it. He just stared at it as though it had personally insulted him. Pfui, he said finally. A performance. Yeah, I said. But was it Broadway or back alley? Neither. Amateur theatrics. A man who intends to kill does not send cocktails to his victim first, nor does he drop trinkets in gutters like confetti. No, Archie, this Grey suit wishes to be seen. He wishes us to suspect him. I leaned against the desk. So he's either innocent or he's the kind of guilty that enjoys applause. Wolfe's lips curved in something that might have been a smile if you squinted. Precisely. He rang for beer. Fritz brought it with the silent resignation of a man who knows the roast in the oven has already been sentenced to reheating. Wolfe twisted the cap and drank half before he spoke again. We must assume, he said, that the second folder is in play. The dent marks the genuine. Without it, any copy is worthless. Our task is not to chase shadows in bars. Our task is to arrange a crucible. That's my cue, I said. You want me to start rounding them up? Not yet. First, pressure. They must be made to squirm before they sit. Call Lyle in the morning. Inform him you have testimony placing him at the credenza at the precise moment the folder vanished. See how swiftly he denies. Then visit Reed again. Demand to see his equipment. Tell him you found frequencies in use near my office. He will either expel you or betray himself. And Mrs. Voss? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. She is frightened, which makes her unpredictable. Unpredictability is intolerable. Invite her here tomorrow evening, offer her tea, let her feel the trap without quite seeing it. I scribbled the notes, though I already knew they were cold. This was Wolfe's version of foreplay. Build tension, let them twist, then snap the net when they least expect it. The phone rang again. This time, Fritz answered. He came back pale, like the roast had filed for divorce. For you, Mr. Goodwin. I picked it up. A man's voice, rough and short. You don't know me, but you're digging in a place that's already been buried. Stop now, or we'll stop you. Click. I looked at Wolfe. That's the second threat tonight. We're starting to get popular. He grunted. 2 threats in one evening indicate incompetence, not menace. A competent adversary does not warn. He acts. Fine, I said. But incompetent or not, somebody shoved Saul off the trail tonight, and they were close enough to drop a piece of the folder while doing it. Wolfe lifted a brow. Which means, my dear Archie, that they are near. Too near. And tomorrow, when you prod them, they will wriggle. He closed his eyes, signaling the conversation was finished. Bring me those wriggles, Archie. Then we will dine. That was Wolfe. Calm as granite, immovable as a monument, and about as comforting. I went to bed thinking about a grey suit, a dented snap, and a cocktail I hadn't drunk that might have been laced with something more final than soda water. Tomorrow the pressure was going to break somebody open, and I just hoped it wouldn't be me. Chapter 8. Archie turns the screws. Morning came with drizzle and a stack of phone messages Fritz had collected like wildflowers nobody wanted. Wolfe was upstairs with orchids, meaning I had the field. My orders were simple. Put heat under Graham Lyle and Calvin Reed until something popped. Wolfe's words were, make them wriggle. Mine were, kick their shins until they talk. First stop, Lyle's Uptown Fortress. He greeted me in another perfect suit, this one grey with a tie that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. His smile was still polished, but the corners were cracking. Mr. Goodwin, he said, too smooth. Back again so soon, I trust Mr. Wolfe enjoyed his evening. Not half as much as he enjoyed hearing you were seen near the credenza, at the exact moment the folder disappeared. That made the smile twitch. That's not true. Of course it isn't, but you denied it faster than I could finish the sentence, which means you've thought about it, which means you're nervous, and being nervous is good for me. He folded his hands. You play games, Mr. Goodwin, dangerous ones. Buddy, you should see me play cards. I let the silence hang. He fidgeted, and men like Lyle aren't supposed to fidget. Finally, he leaned forward. Off the record, he said. Eleanor Voss had the most reason. She was watching that folder like it was her child. Maybe she was afraid someone would see what was in it. Funny, I said. She told me the same thing about you. He flinched. I stood. I'll be back when you've worked out which story you like better. In the meantime, Wolfe says hello. Calvin Reed was easier. Tech boys always are. I found him hunched over 3 monitors in an office that smelled like burnt coffee and overheated wires. You again, he muttered. Me again, I said, and I'm here for a tour of your toys. No, that was quick, I said. But here's the thing. We've been picking up chatter on a frequency near Wolfe's office. Suspicious little hums. Now, either you've been listening in, or someone's using your equipment to do it. Which way do you want it? He spun in his chair, pale. That's ridiculous. Sure, then show me. No. I leaned closer. Listen, Reed. You're in over your head. Think you can dance with donors and staffers without getting your shoes muddy? Think again. If you don't show me, Wolfe will subpoena you, and believe me, you don't want to see him in court. He licked his lips. His fingers twitched near a keyboard, then froze. Fine. Fine. Look, he pulled up a program, lines of code scrolling like ants on sugar, frequencies, logins, timestamps. I didn't understand half of it, but I understood enough to see one line glowing red. Date, yesterday. Time, 2 p.m. Origin, Bar Adria. Well, I said. You were listening in. No, Reed said quickly. That wasn't me. Somebody piggybacked. They used my server, but it wasn't me. That's the trouble with piggybacks, I said. They leave hoof prints. He slumped. You don't get it. They're trying to set me up. Buddy, you're already set up. The question is whether you climb out or stay buried. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair with a beer, eyes half-lidded like a cat pretending to nap. I dropped my notebook on his desk. Lyle twitched, Reed cracked, and both pointed fingers at Voss. which means she's either guilty or very good at being popular. Wolfe grunted, as expected. Tomorrow evening we will summon them all. All? Yes. The senator, his aide, his director, his donors, his journalist, and his technologist. We will hear their lies together. Great, I said. Nothing like a full house of suspects under one roof. Shall I hire a bouncer? No, Wolfe said. His eyes opened, sharp as glass. You will hire Saul, and you will prepare chairs. We are going to peel them like onions, Archie, layer by layer, until only tears remain. He closed his eyes again. Inform them, tomorrow night at 8. Just like that, the trap was set. Chapter 9. The office. Gathering. 8 o'clock sharp, and the brownstone felt like Grand Central with fewer trains and more tempers. I had spent the day turning the office into Wolfe's arena, chairs polished and lined up like pews, fresh ashtrays, and enough space between the rugs to make suspects feel like they were crossing hot coals when Wolfe addressed them. Fritz hovered in the dining room with the air of a man guarding a roast from wolves. Saul Panzer was upstairs, waiting with the discretion of a ghost. By 8:15, they were all here. Senator Forbes, stiff and tight-lipped, his aide Kimbrough dripping sweat before he even sat. Vivian Loring, sharp-eyed and wound like piano wire. Eleanor Voss, pearls gleaming under the lamplight, voice soft but brittle. Graham Lyle, immaculate suit, grin just a shade too wide. Calvin Reed, jittering like his veins ran on battery acid, and June Armitage, notebook tucked under her arm, eyes flicking everywhere like she was gathering headlines out of thin air. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does. He let them shuffle into their chairs while he sat behind the desk, vast and still, his lips pressed together like a judge who'd already read the verdict. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice calm as a winter stone. "You are here because a folder vanished. The folder contained names that mean power, money, and ruin, depending on how they are displayed. It reappeared, dented in one corner, which means it is genuine. But during its absence, it was copied. That copy will soon be used for a second theft. We are here to determine which of you has already soiled his hands." That broke the dam. Forbes thundered about trust and loyalty. Loring snapped that any accusations were baseless. Reed stammered about piggybacked servers. Voss whispered that she had warned me. Lyle smiled like a cream. Cat and Armitage just scribbled, which was her way of baiting everyone else to perform. Wolfe lifted a hand, and silence dropped like a curtain. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "present the fragment." I set the torn snap on his desk. It winked in the lamplight like a cheap jewel. "This," Wolfe said, "was recovered after a pursuit last night. It proves the genuine folder was in close proximity, but it also proves the thief is clumsy. A man copying data does not need to carry leather. A man who wishes to trade in symbols, however, does." He let that hang. Reed squirmed. Voss clutched her pearls. "Mr. Reed," Wolfe said suddenly, "you permitted your servers to be used in espionage." Reed's face went pale. "I didn't. I swear I—" "Pfui," Wolfe snapped. "Your guilt is not theft. It is negligence. You are a tool, not a craftsman." Loring cut in sharply. "This is absurd. None of us—" "Silence," Wolfe said, not raising his voice but slicing through hers like a knife. "You fear exposure, Miss Loring. Exposure of your own correspondence. I advise patience. Your turn will come." He turned his gaze on Voss. "And you, madam. You asked Mr. Goodwin to meet you in secret. You hope to guide suspicion toward others. You are terrified because your fortune is stitched to this senator's fate. But terror is not theft." Voss opened her mouth, closed it, and pressed her pearls so hard I thought they might snap. "Which leaves two," Wolfe said. His eyes shifted to Lyle, then Armitage. "Mr. Lyle profits from leverage. Miss Armitage profits from revelations. Both touched the air around that folder. Both could have taken it, but one of you already has. Every pair of eyes in the room swung between them. Lyle spread his hands. I attended a luncheon. I made a toast. That is all. Armitage's voice cut in, cool and sharp. I told Goodwin about the dent. Why would I help him if I had taken it? Wolfe's mouth curved just faintly. An excellent question. The answer is simple. Protect yourself. By pointing out the dent, you ensured that the genuine folder could be identified. That way, when the copy appeared, suspicion would fall on someone else. It was not altruism. It was insurance. Armitage flushed, but her chin didn't waver. That's ridiculous. Is it? Wolfe leaned forward slightly, the only movement that the room would see from him all night. You alone had opportunity, motive, and wit. You alone understood that donors mean more than money. They mean stories. And you, Miss Armitage, live on stories. The room went still. The only sound was Kimbrough's breathing, too fast, like he'd run here instead of sitting. Armitage's pen tapped against her notebook once, twice. Then she smiled, thin and bitter. You can't prove it. No, Wolfe said softly. I do not prove. I demonstrate. The proof will come when you attempt your second theft, unless you confess now. She sat back, eyes glittering, and said nothing. That silence was louder than any confession I'd ever heard. And Wolfe, damn him, smiled. Chapter 10. The Reveal. Silence in Wolfe's office is a tricky beast. Sometimes it's comfortable, like a cat stretching in the sun. Other times it's the kind that makes the back of your neck itch. Tonight it was the second kind. Every suspect sat frozen, watching Wolfe like he was a judge about to hang the verdict around someone's neck. June Armitage tried to look unshaken, but her pen tapped against her notebook in a rhythm only guilt plays. Wolfe waited until the tapping stopped. Then he spoke, slow and precise. Miss Armitage, you are intelligent. You noticed a dent others overlooked. You sought to share it with Mr. Goodwin, not for our benefit, but to steer us. The moment you identified the dent, you created doubt that any undented copy was real. Thus, if such a copy appeared, suspicion would drift elsewhere. A clever ruse, but transparent. Armitage's lips twitched. You're building castles on sand. Phooey, castles do not interest me, but motives do. You live by headlines. You promised your editor exclusives. A donor list in the right hands is not merely scandal. It is circulation, influence, prestige. You stole the folder to copy it. That was the first theft. The second, that is your plan for tomorrow's luncheon. Release the information at the moment it wounds most. One theft for insurance, the second for impact. The senator slammed a fist onto the armrest. Is this true? Armitage's eyes flicked, not to him, but to Loring. He was going to bury it. I was going to report it. That's the difference between us. Loring snapped, You'd destroy us all for ink. Armitage shot back, better ink than corruption. Wolfe raised a hand, and both women shut their mouths like schoolchildren. His gaze drifted to Kimbrough. You, sir. You knew the bug in my office. You touched my desk. You are guilty of negligence and cowardice, but not theft. Kimbrough stammered. I was told to— Silence, Wolfe cut him. You meddled at the behest of others. But you did not steal. Then to Lyle. You thrive on leverage, but you did not act. Your fear of exposure outweighs your courage. To Voss. You attempted misdirection through Mr. Goodwin. Understandable, but ineffective. And finally, to Reed. You are a fool. Your servers were used, perhaps without your hand, perhaps not. You will answer to your contracts later. He turned back to Armitage. But your hand was deliberate. You alone stood to profit. You alone engineered both thefts. Admit it. Armitage's cheeks flushed, but her eyes were steady. You can't stop me. The story's already moving. That was the crack Wolfe had been waiting for. He sat forward, eyes gleaming. "Then you confess?" "Thank you." She blinked, realizing too late the trap. She denied, deflected, and hedged. But that slip, the story's already moving, was an admission, not just intent. Execution. Forbes rose half out of his seat. "You traitor!" Armitage snapped her notebook shut. "Truth isn't treason, Senator." Wolfe tapped the bell on his desk. Saul Panzer entered from the hallway, calm as an undertaker. "Miss Armitage," Wolfe said, "you will remain until the police arrive." "Mr. Goodwin, call Inspector Kramer." I picked up the phone, though I knew Kramer would arrive with a temper that could blister paint. Armitage sat back, smiling faintly, as though even in defeat she'd scored her headline. Wolfe drained the rest of his beer, set the glass down, and spoke as if no one else were in the room. "Politics is filth, Archie. But filth is most dangerous when it pretends to be virtue." That was his verdict, and it landed heavier than the police would. Chapter 11. Aftermath. Kramer stormed in 20 minutes later, bringing his usual perfume of cigar smoke and bad temper. He took one look at the lineup of suspects, another at Wolfe sitting smug as a sultan, and let out a growl that could have scared dogs in Jersey. "Blast it, Wolfe, you couldn't wait until I had a decent night's sleep. You had to yank me into a political circus." Wolfe lifted his hand like a priest blessing the congregation. "Inspector, your leisure is not my concern. The thief is Miss Armitage. She has confessed by implication and by arrogance." Kramer's eyes snapped to her. "Is that so?" Armitage smirked, as if she were already dictating the article. "I reported what others buried. Call it theft if you like. I call it journalism." Kramer slammed his fist on the desk hard enough to rattle the paperweights. "I call it evidence tampering and fraud. You're coming with me." He nodded to the two uniforms flanking him. They stepped forward and relieved her of the notebook she'd been clutching like a holy relic. Forbes exhaled loudly, a man reprieved from the gallows. Loring looked ready to cry but refused to ruin her mascara. Lyle kept his smile, thin and sour. Reed looked like he'd seen his servers repossessed, and Eleanor Voss just sat very still. Pearls, quiet, at last. Kramer shoved the notebook under his arm. "You know, Wolfe, one of these days you're going to hand me a case without all the dramatics. Just once, I'd like to show up after you've done all the boring paperwork instead of babysitting your theater." "Phooey," Wolfe said, sipping his beer. "You should be grateful. I spare you the effort of thought." Kramer muttered something unprintable, barked at his men, and marched Armitage out. She didn't resist. She just looked back once, her eyes gleaming with a satisfaction I couldn't read. Maybe she was, already writing her last column in her head. The door closed, leaving the brownstone heavy with silence. Wolfe leaned back, laced his fingers across his stomach, and closed his eyes. "Dinner," he said. "Fritz may serve now." That was it. No victory speech, no crowing. Just dinner. Forbes rose stiffly. "You have our thanks, Mr. Wolfe. Though God help me, you've probably made us more enemies than we had this morning." Wolfe didn't open his eyes. "Enemies, Senator, are the inevitable garnish of power. Good night." Forbes sputtered, but Loring tugged his sleeve and herded him out. The others followed, leaving only me and Wolfe in the office. I leaned on the desk. "You know, one of these days your sense of timing is going to get me killed. Armitage might have had a gun at that bar." "You survived," Wolfe murmured. "As always." "Yeah, lucky me. You ever think maybe next time you could come along?" His lips twitched. "Why would I, when you perform admirably without me?" That was Wolfe's way of saying thanks, which is about as close to sentimental as he gets. Fritz appeared in the doorway with a silver tray, the smell of roast and herbs trailing after him. Wolfe sat up, reached for his napkin, and sighed contentedly as if the world had righted itself again. "Politics," he said as Fritz carved, a perpetual stew of greed, deceit, and vanity. It is remarkable that the Republic endures at all. I poured myself a glass of wine. Well, boss, maybe it's because every now and then a fat man in a chair and his wise-cracking errand boy save it from choking on itself. Wolfe shot me a glance over his fork. Archie, your immodesty is appalling. Pass the salt. And just like that, the puzzle at the political luncheon was over. Another body of lies, gutted neatly and served with dinner. Chapter 12. Wolfe's reflection. The plates were cleared, the wine finished, and the storm outside the brownstone had settled to a drizzle. Fritz disappeared into the kitchen, humming like a man whose roast had at last received its justice. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, one hand resting on his mountainous stomach as though it were a throne. I was still at the table, twirling the stem of my empty glass. So that's that. Armitage gets her headline in the form of a police report. Forbes gets to keep his donors, and we get indigestion. Neat bow, tied tight. Bah, Wolfe muttered. Do not romanticize it. What we resolved tonight was not a mystery, but banality. A journalist with ambition, a senator with secrets, retainers with greed. That is not intrigue. It is the human condition. I grinned. You do know you sound like a civics textbook written by a cynic. He opened one eye. And you sound like a fool who believes newspapers exist for truth. They exist for appetite. Miss Armitage did not seek justice. She sought acclaim. She is no different than donors seeking influence or senators seeking votes. Each feeds on vanity, and vanity is always hungry. He closed his eyes again and reached for his beer. If this republic survives another generation, it will not be because of politicians or journalists. It will be because ordinary men refuse to be as venal as those who claim to lead them. Touching, I said. Shall I stitch it on a pillow? Wolfe huffed. Stitch it on your forehead if you like. At least then you may remember it. I leaned back, smiling. I'll remember, boss. But I'll also remember that you solved a political scandal tonight without leaving your chair. Again. Which means tomorrow, when Kramer calls me to grumble about paperwork, I'll tell him the truth. You saved his hide. Wolfe grunted. That was as close to agreement as I'd get. I rose, stretched, and looked out the window. The city lights blinked in the wet streets, 1,000 stories waiting for someone else's trouble. Well, boss, I said, chalk up another puzzle cracked. Shall I file it under luncheon's gone bad? File it under futility, Wolfe replied. He drained his glass. Now go. I intend to sleep. And that was my cue. I left him there, a mountain once more, silent and immovable. Tomorrow the city will serve another mess, and tomorrow I'd be the one fetching, carrying, and dodging bullets while Wolfe trimmed orchids and philosophized. But tonight we had beaten back vanity, lies, and politics with nothing more than logic and stubbornness. Not a bad night's work, even if the roast was late. So ended the puzzle at the political luncheon. Wolfe's brain, my legs, and a dented brass snap that told the truth better than any senator ever could.